Hello, I'm Hadriatus, Armchair General, and today, for my first review, I'll be reviewing Warmachine, the game of steam-powered miniatures combat. Originally released in 2003, Warmachine is played with metal miniatures, although they do seem to be realizing that plastic is a lot more desirable for gamers. What with being easier to model, cut, paint, and, oh yes, carry. Seriously, have you tried to carry a full metal army? It's like a warm-up at the gym. But anyway, the miniatures represent the various commanders and forces of the Iron Kingdoms, a steampunk setting originally based on Dungeons & Dragons. The game started out with four main factions: Signar, the good guys fighting for peace, justice, and equality for humans, ruled by a king who usurped his brother, the rightful ruler of the land; Cawdor, the Russians from the cold north, an evil empire bent on expansion based on their claims that the southern lands used to be theirs anyway. Clearly the other factions were just renting them. The Protectorate of Menoth, Knight Templar Crusaders, trying to spread their faith amongst the heathens with missionaries and flamethrowers. And the Nightmare Empire of Crix, the only unambiguously evil bastards in the whole setting. They're the undead empire working for a giant dragon intent on wiping out most life on the continent. For some reason. Well, that's it for the intro. Let's move on to the rules. To play this wargame, you will need the basics. Some six-sided dice, a tape measure, some sort of scenery, and of course, models. Normally, the game uses 2d6, two six-sided dice, and these are rolled and added to a value before being compared to another value to see if any actual damage is caused. Now, this is done for each model, resulting in a slightly slower dice rolling than in other games, such as 40k. But on the other hand, this system does allow things to actually be invulnerable to small arms fire. So, for example, your heaviest infantry won't be taken down by a single shot from the lowliest trooper. Movement is done in inches. Yeah, no change there.
War. War never changes.
Models can either move their full speed rating, usually 6, and cast magic or shoot. Yes, your snipers can move and shoot now. However, they do suffer a drop in accuracy, as despite what Hollywood keeps trying to teach us, shooting from the hip doesn't work! Models can also run, which doubles their movement at the cost of doing anything else that turn. Now, charging is somewhere between moving and running, as it boosts the model's movement, but only by 3 inches, whilst giving it a bonus to melee attacks, as it's a tradition for a charging model to receive some benefit. Shooting and combat both work in the same way. You roll 2 dice and add them to the rating of either your melee or your ranged attack. Then you compare the total that you come up with to the enemy's defense. If it exceeds or matches, it means you've hit them. You then do this again and add the weapon's strength to find out if you've damaged the enemy by comparing that value to the enemy's armor. You have to exceed the armor to cause any damage. Now, this works well enough, but in larger games where you have to roll 2 dice per model attacking, this does tend to slow things down a lot. The game tends to focus around warcasters. These are special characters who act as the generals of the player's armies. Each one is pretty much unique and has their own sort of play style, and every single one of them will change the way you play your army. Want a simple approach to warfare? Take the Butcher, who specializes in charging headlong at the enemy, shrugging off range attacks and slaughtering his opponents in melee. Prefer a more subtle approach? Choose the Negra, who will whittle the opponent's offensive might into nothingness. Each of the main factions has really a large number of warcasters to choose from, but in the main rulebook you'll find 4 of them for each of the factions, for Krix, Khador, Signar, and Menoth. Now, warcasters are essentially wizards, so they're really frail. Because, as we all know, wizards are always frail. Still, that doesn't stop some of them being able to take down anything thrown at them single-handedly. Oh my god, I'm getting sick of that sound effect. Magic power in this game, usually warcasters, is represented by focus points. On average, you have 6 of these, and each one is used to... Now, a wizard's focus points are replenished at the beginning of each turn, so to win you have to learn how to manage your focus and make sure your army is operating at peak efficiency. Now, there are 6 scenarios provided in the rulebook. Mostly the basic stuff you would expect, taking and holding ground, assassination runs, and utter carnage. However, most of the time, each player will be trying to kill the other's warcaster, since a caster kill pretty much guarantees victory. Well, that's the rules covered. Let's get to the good stuff. Miniatures. Now, the original sculpts of the warcasters were, shall we say, a bit of a mixed bag. We got Sorcerer and the Negro, which were rather nice sculpt, but Striker had no real action to him, with a rather poor pose, and he was a bit of a flat model, really. Whilst Krios was okay, but not brilliant. Now, all of these casters are pretty much your starter casters you get in the starter box sets for each faction. These were all metal, but Privateer Press is now heading towards releasing full plastic versions, which from previews seem to be really much better sculpts. Just like the new plastic warjacks are better than the old metal ones. What? What's a warjack? Oh right, yeah, I sort of skipped that part. Warjacks are essentially gigantic machines, powered by steam and magic, which take the roles of tanks in this setting. Yeah, that's about it, really. Anyway, each of the 4 main factions has a very distinct aesthetic, making the models easily recognizable. Signar use rounded edges, hammers, studs on most of their armor and jacks, whilst Khador favors large plates of metal and axes. The Menoth miniatures generally have robes and flames, and look sort of gothic, whilst the Krix are all about jagged edges, the undead, and pirates. Well, there's also some lesser factions which have been added since the release of the rulebook now, like the Mercenaries and the Elves. Since they're not in the main rulebook, they're not being covered right now, although I may get round to doing their specific faction books at a later date. So, to sum up, Warmachine is a relatively quick and furious game, which lends itself more to small-scale skirmish battles. You can do large, proper sieges and, games with maybe hundreds of models per side, but those will last a long time because of the way the dice rolling works. But apart from that, the core mechanics are sound and they lend themselves really well to a nice evening of play. The background is nicely done. I didn't review that in great detail, true, but if you get the book, you can read it for yourself. It's a nicely developed world. It's got an established history. The artwork in the book, pretty much as you'd expect, really nice. As you've seen throughout this review, I've used some pieces of art. All of those are examples. And the miniatures are pretty nicely sculpted. Limited range of poses on some, although they are expanding upon that. More units are being created, and they're also moving from white metal onto plastic, which will make them easier to convert and paint and model, as I've already mentioned. So yeah, go to your local gaming store, go online, go into the Privateer Press website, and check it out. It's a really nice, really quick game. True, it might sometimes will last a bit longer, and you do need to get your head around the rules a bit, especially how the focus management and how all the little finer details work, because most units tend to have their own special rules which affect the way the game plays. But yeah, give it a go.